Welcome to Brew Cheese, where we brew up the finest of cheese. If you're new to our channel, we make budget-friendly deck techs, often with an unexpected twist to keep your playgroup guessing. Today, I have for you a deck tech that is definitely unusual. You might have seen the thumbnail and you might be thinking, Amnesia? Elfball? Well, hold those thoughts, because I'll explain it all. But first, let's get to the main attraction of this deck. Our commander is Damia, Sage of Stone. She's a black, a green, a blue, and a 4 for a 4/4 legendary Gorgon wizard. She's got Death Touch, and she makes you skip your draw step. But she has a powerful third ability. At the beginning of our upkeep, we draw cards until we have a full 7 in hand. One of the most powerful things a commander can do is cover one of the basic things a successful commander deck needs to do in a game, and card draw is one of those things. Damia takes care of this in spades, ensuring us a full grip when we begin our turn. But look at that mana cost. 7 mana right out of the gate. Fortunately, with this particular build, I think we have things well in hand. Pun intended. So, what are we doing here? What are we trying to accomplish? Well, the first thing we're going to do is ramp. Ramp like there is no tomorrow. We have a 7 CMC commander to get out on the board after all. But even after we do get her out, our job of ramping is definitely not done. We're also going to try and empty our hand. That might mean we use our lands and ramp pieces to play more ramp pieces. Or it might mean we try our best to discard everything before it gets around to our turn again. That's where the Amnesia part of the deck archetype comes in. Calling it a discard deck didn't do it justice because those decks usually try to make other people discard. But here, we are actively trying to do it to ourselves. So, I've named a deck that tries to discard, tries to lose everything in its memory, so to speak, an Amnesia deck. What are we ramping towards? Well, we might as well use all this ramp to feed into spells with X in their casting cost, and make X as big a number as we possibly can. This is where the Elfball archetype comes in. Usually, this is a red-green strategy, where you play lots of ramp to feed into big X spells like Fireball. We're missing red in our color scheme, but fortunately, Sultai offers some pretty fine choices in X spells that are equally as game-winning. Finally, we're going to synergize as much as possible, reaping benefits whenever we discard cards, draw cards, or for having a big graveyard. Well, let's stop talking about all these things we're going to be doing and show you how we're going to do it. Our extensive ramp package begins with the humble Elvish Mystic and Llanowar Elves, both of which are 1 mana, 1/1 elf druids that tap for a green. We wouldn't be a self-respecting deck with Golgari colors if we weren't also running Deathrite Shaman. Thanks to its recent reprints in the Golgari Guild Kit, the price has come down significantly, allowing us to run it here. We can use it to exile a land from a graveyard to generate a mana for us, exile an instant or sorcery from a graveyard to hit all of our opponents for 2 life, or exile a creature from a graveyard to gain 2 life. Not only can the mana generation come in handy, as it is a mana of any color, but the ability to exile almost anything from an opponent's graveyard at instant speed is extremely useful, as commander decks have become more graveyard-centric through the years. Deathcap Cultivator taps for either a green or a black, and when we have Delirium, that is, 4 or more card types in our graveyard, he also gets Death Touch. We can get Delirium very easily with this deck, but his value is primarily in his production of 2 of our colors. Speaking of, Urborg Elf taps for any one of the 3 colors of mana we need for this deck to run. Harvester Druid and Naga Vitalist are more or less the same card, both 2 mana creatures that tap for any color mana that a land we control could produce. In a similar vein, Quirion and Sylvok Explorer are 2 mana creatures that tap for any color mana an opponent's land produces. This is a little more versatile, as we usually have 3 opponents, and there's a good chance that we can cover at least 2, if not all 3 of our colors, especially if one of them has a land out that taps for any color mana. Drover of the Mighty and Paradise Druid both tap for any color of mana. Drover gets a power toughness bump if we have a dinosaur out, but there are not any in the deck. Paradise Druid, meanwhile, has hexproof while it's untapped. Gyre Engineer and Llanowar Tribe both cost 3, but Gyre Engineer taps for a green and a blue, while Tribe taps for 3 green. Krosan Restorer lets us untap a land, but if we have Threshold, that is, 7 or more cards in our graveyard, we untap 3 lands instead. Far Wanderings tutors up a land and puts it into play tapped, but if we have Threshold, we tutor up 3 instead. Of course, we don't want to put all of our eggs in one basket with just creature-based ramp. We'll also be running Dimir, Golgari, and Simic Signets. Each one is a 2-mana artifact that taps to let us convert 1 mana into 2 that are in our color scheme. Talisman of Curiosity, Dominance, and Resilience are 2-mana artifacts that tap for a colorless, but they also tap for 1 of 2 possible colors each. If we use them to produce colored mana, though, they'll ping us for 1. We're also running a number of tools that let us empty our hand, and a lot of these let us keep the ramp terrain going. Cadaverous Bloom lets us ditch cards, netting 2 black or 2 green with every card. This isn't true discard, as we are exiling cards rather than discarding them, something that some of our later cards do care about. But the fact that this lets us convert unused cards into 2 mana each means that we are definitely happy to see it. But if you want true discard and to still earn mana from it, Scourge Familiar has us covered. Although it is one of the more pricey cards in the deck, its ability to just let us convert cards into straight black mana while feeding our graveyard is unparalleled. Bog Witch lets us tap it to convert a card in our hand into a Dark Ritual, while Llanowar Mentor does the same but converts our card into a Llanowar Elf. Silverglade Pathfinder taps to convert a card in our hand into a Rampant Growth. Although all of these only discard 1 card at a time, they do let us turn things like extra land draws we don't need into even more ramp pieces. Noose Constrictor both allows us a little bit of protection from flyers, or as a nice attacker, since we can discard as many cards as we like to give it a +1/+1 bump with every card. Even if we don't need it for combat, it is still an unlimited discard outlet for when we have out a discard payoff card, or to get a card out of our hand that we're not going to use. Psychotog lets us both discard cards to pump it, or feed our graveyard to it to make it even bigger. Use the second ability with caution, as we do play with a few cards that care about cards in the graveyard. But if need be, Psychotog can become extremely large in an instant. Dawnstrider helps to protect us, allowing us to tap it to convert a card in our hand into a fog. Although this is only 1 card per turn, oftentimes having this on the board is enough to make an opponent look elsewhere if they are thinking of attacking someone. We're also running both Stronghold Biologist and Stronghold Machinist, either of which let us pay 2 blue into it, tap it, and discard a card to counter either a creature or a non-creature spell. Finally, our discard outlets end with one of the best in Narcissism. This enchantment lets us pay a green and discard a card to give a creature +2/+2 until end of turn, with no limit to activation. We can also opt to pay a green and sacrifice it to give a further +2/+2. With this, we can make any of our creatures huge at a moment's notice. With all of our mana production, we need something to feed it into. Villainous Wealth lets us exile X cards off an opponent's library, and we can cast for free any number of those cards, so long as they have a casting cost that's X or less. Villainous Wealth can easily win games. dumping some of our opponent's best stuff on our board. Although Profane Command has a few modes, like resurrecting a creature out of your graveyard, giving a creature -X/-X until end of turn, or giving a large amount of creatures fear for a turn, when we are picking the two modes for this card, one of those modes will almost always be the first, draining an opponent for X life. The second mode we pick will largely be based off the board state at the time. It'd be neat if you could pick the first mode twice and hit two opponents, or double up on one, but that would make for a very busted card. Mind Grind makes an opponent reveal cards off their library until they reveal X lands, and then puts all the revealed cards into their graveyard. With a little bit of math, you can easily determine how many lands an opponent probably has left in their deck. Most commander decks run somewhere in the neighborhood of 37 lands, some less if casting costs are low or there's a lot of ramp, and some more if it's something like a Lands Matters deck that wants to hit land drops reliably. Using this knowledge, it's very possible to completely mill out an opponent, especially one that has been doing a considerable amount of land ramping. Now, to be honest, if you happen to have access to an Exsanguinate or Torment of Hailfire, either one is going to be a premium X spell in this deck, but they do come with a fairly high bar for a budget build to get over. Still, I feel like I should provide full disclosure in case you have access to one of these and want to make a swap. Gelatinous Genesis costs a green and double X, and it creates X ooze tokens that are each XX. That means that if we can pump, say, 15 mana into this, we produce 7 oozes that are all 7/7s. If we have gotten a hold of something like Cadaverous Bloom, we could pay something like 29 mana into this to crank out something truly obscene. 14 oozes, each 14/14. That's something only a board wipe is going to remedy. Empty the Pits lets us convert both our mana on the table and the cards in our graveyard into zombies. If we've been dutifully dumping cards and playing ramp, we can have so many zombies. Biomass Mutation is especially fun, but also a little tricky. It lets us make all of our creatures have base power and toughness XX until end of turn. While we don't want to devote all of our mana production into the X cost, because we want to turn as many of our mana dudes into huge beaters as we can, we also don't want to go too light on that number either. But play it smart, and you can win out of nowhere by smashing your opponents in the face with behemoth-sized Llanowar elves. We also have a number of synergies for the things we're doing already in the deck. Every time we discard a card, Archfiend of Ifnir puts a -1/-1 counter on every one of our opponent's creatures. This bad boy can easily keep your opponents from getting anything to stick to the board and will have to be answered. Drakehaven and Faith of the Devoted each let us pay 1 every time we discard, and for that mana investment, Drakehaven gives us a 2/2 Flying Drake token, and Faith of the Devoted hits all of our opponents for 2 and gives us 2 life. Either of these can quickly swing the game in our favor, giving us tons of flyers or loads of life while draining all of our opponents down quickly. Can you imagine discarding all 7 cards, paying 7 mana, and hitting each of your opponents for 14 life while gaining 14? Or making 7 Drake tokens? Since we're going to be drawing to 7 at the beginning of our turn, we can use Psychosis Crawler to ping each of our opponents for each of those cards. We just have to be careful not to discard down to 0 unless we're okay with losing this. On our turn, though, it will always be a 7/7 until we've played something. Soul Swallower gets 3 +1/+1 counters on our upkeep, so long as we have 4 or more card types in our graveyard. This creature can get very big very quickly and does have trample, making it a formidable beater. Speaking of good beaters with trample, Centaur Vinecrasher not only racks up +1/+1 counters with every land that goes to our graveyard, It also lets us bring it back from the dead for 2 green whenever we do ditch a land. Finally, we're running Worm Harvest, which for 5 mana makes us a 1/1 worm for every land in our graveyard. We can also discard a land and pay the 5 again every time we want to make even more worm tokens. This card alone can make an insane amount of worms. With the amount of draw and ramp we are running, it is not uncommon to cast this 2-3 times on our turn. Of course, our commander is very central to the deck, and we will need to protect it, or keep opponents from playing big game-ending spells. We will also want to avoid board wipes, as those can set us back big time. To answer all of these threats, we are running a good amount of counter magic. Good old Counterspell counters any spell for 2 blue, while Negate and Countersquall each counter a non-creature spell, with Countersquall hitting the opponent for 2 in the process. Foil allows us to discard one of our islands and any other card to cast this for free, or we can pay the 4 mana price tag. Either way, it provides a hard counter. Forbid is probably the best counterspell in the deck, countering any spell for 3 mana and giving us the ability to discard 2 cards to put it back in our hand when we cast it, rather than into the graveyard. Arcane Denial gives us and the spellcaster extra cards, but we can counter any spell with a very flexible casting cost. Plasm Capture and Spell Swindle can not only counter a spell, they convert that spell into mana that we can use for our X spells. Plasm Capture gives us colorless mana equal to the countered spell's CMC on our turn, while Spell Swindle makes that many treasure tokens, making it the more versatile of the two. We may also need to deal with a variety of threats. Reality Shift allows us to exile a creature, making it handy against indestructible targets, but our opponent does get to manifest the top card of their library. If that top card is not a creature, they won't get any benefit out of this beyond a free 2/2 creature. Curse of the Swine allows us to exile X creatures and give the controller a 2/2 pig in exchange for each. With enough mana, this could be a veritable one-sided board wipe. Battle at the Bridge is a personal favorite, even in a deck that does not run non-mana rock artifacts. We can eliminate an indestructible creature and gain a ton of life in the process. Casualties of War is a phenomenal bit of removal. For 6 mana, we destroy an artifact, a creature, an enchantment, a land, and a planeswalker. Status and Statue is unlikely to be cast for its status half, but the statue half is a great bit of removal, letting us remove an artifact, a creature, or an enchantment for 4 mana at instant speed. Also for 4 mana is one of my favorite removal pieces in green, with Return to the Earth, which destroys an artifact, enchantment, or flying creature, also at instant speed. Although it does have the limitation of only a flying creature, those can be some of the most game impacting. Beast Within lets us destroy any permanent at all, and leave a 3/3 beast in its place. Sultai Charm lets us destroy a monocolored creature, an artifact, an enchantment, or just lets us draw 2 and discard 1. Similar to Return to the Earth, the restriction on the creature is less limiting than one might think. Our suite of board wipes is composed of Plague Wind and In Garrick's Wake, both of which are 9 mana, but only destroy opponents' creatures. Garrick's Wake also destroys their planeswalkers too, and is for some reason cheaper? Go figure. Crux of Fate tends to be a reliable, cheap board wipe for black, and in this deck is no exception. Although I wish we did have dragons to really take advantage of it, even without them the card performs nicely. And then Gaze of Granite not only provides a flavor win, since our commander is a Gorgon, it may also leave her alive at the end since she is CMC 7, and we might be able to get away with putting only 6 into X, and leaving her standing amidst the ruins. But of course, if we have to pay more, we have that option. Our mana base begins with Opulent Palace, which comes in tapped, but taps for any of our colors. We're also running Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, both of which let us tap and sack them to get a basic land out of our deck and put it into play tapped. These lands are not only good for fixing our mana, letting us fetch out whatever we're low on, they also help provide a higher graveyard land count for things like Worm Harvest. Exotic Orchard taps for any color an opponent's land produces. It's not uncommon for an opponent to have a land that taps for any color, which lets us get great use of this, but even if we don't, we can still produce 2 if not all 3 of our colors. Llanowar Wastes and Yavimaya Coast are pain lands, tapping for colorless or tapping for colored mana and pinging us for 1. The Damia version was, unfortunately, a bit pricey, but if you already have it lying around, you may want to include it as well. We're running all 3 of the vivid lands that our color scheme allows. Each of these enters tapped with 2 counters on it, and we can either tap it for its own color, or tap it and remove a counter to make any color mana. We're also running all 3 of the life lands our colors allow, each of which enter tapped and give us a life when it enters, and from then on taps for any one of 2 mana colors each. And we round out our mana base with 9 forests, 6 islands, and 7 swamps, bringing our land count to 34 lands. We can take this risk because of the incredible amount of ramp we are running in the deck, making it very likely that we will have several of these pieces at the beginning of the game and get enough mana to get our commander out when everyone else is. So what's the total? Well, we came in just under our target budget at $24.94. With those prices including cards of any condition located on TCG Player, not a sponsor. That price does exclude shipping, which I'll cover in a future video. I'd like to thank all of our viewers, and if you like what we're doing here, spread the word by subscribing, sharing, Traveling Minstrel Show, or just leave a comment telling us what we missed and what you'd like to see in a future video. Thank you again, and see you next video.